Welcome to Lifestyles of the Not Jet Set, the travel show full of the joyful spirit of history tourism, but without so much jet fuel. In today's episode, we are sailing on the Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, in a boat equipped with both sails, powered by wind, and oars, powered by human muscle, with no need for fossil fuels. This episode reflects on the history of this bay and the lessons it holds for our own efforts to live in the world that ought to be, rather than merely accepting the world that the powers tell us is supposed to be good enough. Here, history is all around us. Newport, where we visited a few days ago, has the mansions of the robber barons and industrialists of the late 19th century, with the names of Belmont and Astor and Vanderbilt. Part of the recent HBO series, The Gilded Age, is set here. In this bay, centuries even older than that, we remember the example of Roger Williams, the eccentric preacher and political visionary who arrived in New England in 1631, determined to live out his principles in the New World. His ideas quickly ran afoul of the authorities of both church and government in Boston and Plymouth. For example, Roger Williams thought church and state should be separate, so that religion would be a matter of personal conscience. Imagine that. And he thought it was wrong for white settlers to get the deeds for their property from a king in England. He said a valid deed had to come from the proper authorities, which in this case meant the indigenous leaders of the peoples of the Americas. For these views in 1635, Roger Williams was tried in court in Massachusetts, found guilty, and banished. Let me digress for a moment to say I have a soft spot for people who are unfairly judged by the courts of Massachusetts for telling an uncomfortable truth. On August 26th, coming up the week after this vacation ends, 20 friends and I will also be tried by Massachusetts courts in Concord District Court for our civil disobedience against a new private jet airfield expansion of infrastructure at Hanscom Airfield, which you can hear about in the previous episode, episode 18. After his conviction, Roger Williams left behind the European settlements at Boston and Plymouth and moved across the border to the traditional lands of the Narragansett people around this bay, who had lived here since time immemorial. He was already friends with the Narragansett leaders, Miantonomoh and his uncle Canonicus. The island of Canonicus, right over here behind me where we're having our holiday this week, is named after Canonicus because his royal residence was here. Because of William's views on religion, the settlements of this bay became a refuge, a haven for Jews fleeing the Inquisition in Spain, and for Baptists, and for Quakers, who at the time were even being persecuted and even executed in Massachusetts for their faith. The Quaker leader George Fox visited this bay. People sometimes tell me that if we don't fly, we will lose access to the sense of history and the cross-cultural engagement that jet setting offers. But in this place, on this bay, reflect for a moment on the friendship between Miantonomoh, Canonicus, and Roger Williams. Miantonomoh and Canonicus were some of those people in history with a truly extraordinary cross-cultural insight, who navigated the treacherous political and ethnic conflicts of their time, preserving their nation's power and independence for several decades, from the 1630s to the 1670s. And Roger Williams, who understood his own role as an immigrant here in this place by the permission of Miantonomoh and Canonicus, was obliged to respect their authority and learn both their political traditions and their language. Williams not only learned Narragansett himself in Algonquin language, but he wrote a scholarly book entitled A Key to the Language of America, so that other settlers would be able to do likewise if more of them only comprehended the potential of that path forward in history. What am I saying here? The whole world tells us to be realistic. If we choose instead to follow a sense of principle, they call us naive. If we envision a world with radically less fossil fuels, they tell us we'll be unhappy and austere and deprived. If we give up jet setting, they tell us we'll lose out on travel and history and cross-cultural connection. But it's all untrue. Look around for the evidence. For people with a sense of environmental principle, the world we want to live in sits within our reach, ready for us to grasp it, more feasible than people say. Like Roger Williams, consider stepping across that boundary, across that frontier, and settling yourself in the world that ought to be.